You've got a fire in your belly, a passion to serve, and an insatiable drive to contribute. You know that if you can just get your message in front of the right people, you can change lives. But where to start? There are so many options, so many moving pieces. You get bogged down, overwhelmed, frustrated, while the burning desire to serve others consumes you. I know, I've been there. And these days I bring life-changing impact and value to people's lives through the creation of books, funnels, online courses and coaching programs, and virtual summits. This is the Call to Serve podcast. I'm Tim Cooper, and this is my journey. Have you ever wondered why some people just appear to lose interest or switch off while you're talking to them? Like you're mid-sentence and they walk away, or you spend 5 minutes explaining something to them and all they do is just look back at you with this confused, dazed look in their eyes. And you think to yourself, oh my goodness, they just don't get it. And you get all frustrated. And maybe it's them. Maybe they genuinely have no interest in what you're talking about. But 9 times out of 10, it's you, that you have failed to communicate effectively in a way that they understand. An interesting fact is that your brain only takes up 2% of your body weight, but it's responsible for consuming 20% of your daily calories. So that's between like 320 to 450 calories a day your brain uses just to think. And the harder you make somebody think, the more calories they've got to use, and then their brain starts to hurt and they're thinking too hard and they just switch off, go, no, not interested. So you've got to look at how you're communicating to make it easy for the person that you're communicating with to understand. Because after all, what is communication? It's transferring a picture that you've got in your head and placing that picture in the other person's head. And if we don't communicate clearly, like we might think that we're getting our point across and we're saying things clearly and using words they understand, and we've got this very, very clear image in our mind that we're trying to convey. But what's happening in the other person's head is they're just getting this jumbled, tangled mess of string, this mess. And they might be nodding and everything else, but they're not understanding what you're saying. So how to communicate? Well, firstly, clear is always better than clever. And throughout my life, I've worked with and known a few people who are walking encyclopedias and dictionaries, and they don't like to use simple words. If there's a complex multi-syllable word that they can replace for a simple word, they will. And so when these people are talking to you, your brain is working overtime trying to translate or work out these words. And I even know some people who go to such an extent of trying to think up these very intelligent words that they end up, their message is actually opposite because they don't even understand the meaning of the word they're saying. It just sounds impressive. And so their message is very confusing. So one example, I used to work with this person who needed to appear to be intelligent. I'm not saying she wasn't intelligent. She didn't need to do she didn't need to use the language and the big words. And there was a dispute going on with somebody who was of another nationality. English wasn't his first language. And she wrote this email, and instead of using simple English to explain clearly what the situation was, she used these big multi-syllable crazy words. And of course, when he put that message through his translator, he got a totally different message. And the situation just blew up out of control. Whereas if she just used simple, everyday language to articulate her point, then it would have been clear and the issue would have been resolved and everybody would have moved on, everyone would have been happy. So that's one thing. Now, don't try to replace an everyday word with a crazy, complex word just in order to look intelligent. It doesn't work because half the time people don't know what you're talking about anyway, just by virtue of using complex sentence structures and everything else can have the opposite effect on people's interaction with you. Another thing I see a lot of is in professional people, and I've coached a lot of professional people, mainly in the wellness industry, so I can sort of relate and give examples of that. But I see this a lot, no matter what profession people are in, is they speak in industry terms, technobabble, geek speak. You know, they're using terms and words that only people in that profession or associated professions understand. So if they're talking to a colleague or another professional, then yeah, you use those words because those are the words that are expected and they're understood and you can communicate clearly. But when you go outside of your profession and you're talking to the everyday person on the street, they have no idea what you're talking about, especially if you are using industry-specific terms and technobabble. For example, when I was a therapist, I used to have people come to me for treatment and they'd bring in a flyer that had been put in their letterbox. And they say, "Tim, what does this mean?" And I look at it and it would be all the terminology for all the different techniques that person used. Okay, myofascial release, mobilization, pin and stretch, and that sort of stuff. Now, to another massage therapist, we know exactly what that person is talking about, but the person off the street doesn't. They don't know what those terms, how those terms relate to their problem. Because the person off the street doesn't care about the process, they just care about having their problem solved. And you could go onto any website for wellness professionals and you'll see that it happens over and over again. It's like everybody's copying off everybody else, and they're not clarifying what they do and how what they do brings about the result that the person wants. They just spit off this string of their process, all these different big words that somebody who isn't in the industry wouldn't understand. And that's where a lot of their marketing falls down, because unless they're marketing to other professionals in that industry, nobody understands. So how do you become a better communicator? How can you talk to your clients, your friends, your family, whatever, in a way that you're going to be understood and maybe not misunderstood? And it's just to simplify the language, firstly. A lot of people, their vocabulary and their reading skills don't really progress past the 7th or 8th grade level. So you want to bring your language down. And it's not insulting. It's actually being quite respectful, because now if you can communicate something simply in everyday language, the brain doesn't have to work too hard, right? If you've written an article or created a video, and they've got to either leave the article or pause the video and go to Google to look up a word to understand what you're trying to say, you've lost them. Okay, you've lost them. They're no longer in that flow. So it's important to use simple language. Instead of taking a simple word and looking at how can you put a more complex word in, work the other way around. How can you take that complex word and transform it into an everyday word that people will understand? That's step number one. And then step number two is to speak in pictures. use analogies, metaphors, and stories, and also what we call universal events. Like every adult on the planet, for example, has had a bad haircut they don't like. So you could draw an analogy to a bad haircut, or learning to ride a bike, or Christmas, or birthday, weddings, falling in love, falling out of love. All these events are universal. And so when you relate what you're trying to talk about to something that they've experienced in another environment, now you're starting to draw the picture and they understand. And if there is no other option other than to use an industry term, if there is no replacement for it, then clarify it. If you've got to use an industry term, then turn and say, it's kind of like, and then use an analogy or metaphor or story to explain what that word means and paint the picture in that person's mind so that they are understanding what you're saying, that they're getting what you're saying. So, look, I'm the first to admit that sometimes I mispronounce words and sometimes I even use the wrong word. And it's not because I'm being clever, it's just that sometimes I have a bit of a brain pause and the wrong word comes out, and that happens to everybody. But you should never make things more complex in order to try to impress people or impress upon people how intelligent you are. It is far better to be a clear and effective communicator to ensure that your message is getting across, that the people understand. And this is the other thing too, is that in order to speak to be understood, you must first understand. You must know what that person is expecting to get out of the conversation. Because once again, if you're just talking and you're using all these words and everything else, and you think you're communicating really well, and all they're hearing is blah, 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 and it's just not going in. It's a waste of their time, a waste of your time. They walk away totally confused, none the wiser, and their problem still hasn't been resolved. Their question still hasn't been answered. So you must firstly understand. So if you are a professional and you're trying to build your client base, your communication must be outcome or benefit driven. Not all about your process, not all about the highfalutin words and all that impressive stuff, right? It should be focused on that person's outcome. What can they expect through your service or product? Because at the end of the day, that's all they really care about. They don't care about the process. They don't really care about you. They just care about having their problem solved. So that's first and foremost. And once you start to talk to people's problems and communicate clearly and effectively, then you'll find people being more responsive and actually being able to follow the instructions or do what they need to do to move forward. So that's it for today's message. Is clear is always better than clever. That in order to be understood, you must first understand. And obviously, if you're talking face to face and you can see people's eyes glazing over and their head starting to wobble, then you can change up your approach and use a different story or use a different analogy and just change it up to a point where then they start to go, okay, I got it. But in order to be understood, it's actually on you. It's not on them. It's how, firstly, speaking about something that they actually want to hear about, and then speaking in a way that paints the clear picture. So you are actually transferring that picture from your mind clearly into their mind, and they know exactly what you're talking about. There's this thing called the curse of knowledge, and this is what a lot of people have, and even I have to a degree as well. I'm working on it, that when you become proficient in something, when you master something, especially something technical, professionally, you talk up at this postgrad level or this higher level that using all the terms and stuff that you're used to using when you're talking to other professionals. And you've really got to bring that down. And sometimes when you think you're bringing it down, you're still not bringing it down far enough. Like you might think you're simplifying it, but you're only bringing it down to a 10th grade level. So it's still just above that level where you need to be. So to be a better communicator, think about what you need to say to communicate what you need to communicate, and then think of better ways to say it. Think of stories that you can use to illustrate it. Think of analogies and metaphors. Think of ways that you can paint that picture clearly, and you'll see a major change in your communication. And great news, guys, timcooper.au is now live. Still very basic, right? It's just got one front page and then a link to the podcast, but it's there, as I said yesterday. The rest of the pages and the rest of the information and the site will be built out gradually over time. But I now have a site at timcooper.au. If you're watching this on YouTube and you found this information useful, if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button and the little bell. Give me a thumbs up. Got any questions, comments or feedback, please drop them below. If you're listening to this on another podcast platform and you enjoy the show, please follow and give us a review. If there's a way for you to reach out to me via the platform, please do so. Otherwise, I'm always available at tim@timcooper.au. That's tim@timcooper.au. I'd really love to hear from you. And until tomorrow, you take care.